Welcome to the May the 30th, 1989 taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie, as we bring you history notes of Grand Prairie of the past and bring you up to date with some of those that caused these wonderful things to happen in our city. And this is our history tape number 95. Now, last time we told you that one was number 95 with the Shanks family, but actually that was number 94. This is the real history tape number 95. We are so delighted today to have a celebrity with us. Margaret Galloway has been very important to the past of Grand Prairie, and even though she has moved away slightly 4 or 5 miles to the west, she is still a stick stirrer in Grand Prairie, Texas, because she has a great interest in our city. And we're delighted at this time to welcome Margaret Galloway. Welcome, Margaret. We're glad to have you with us today, darling.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Margaret, you are very special to many of past happenings in Grand Prairie, Texas. And first of all, we always like to establish a relationship with our guests on the show. And on your camera, immediately in front of you, we'd like for you to look in that direction and give us the genealogy of Margaret Bingham Galloway. Tell us about a little bit. We want you to name your parents, your mother and father, of course, and her maiden name, and then we'll talk a little bit about where they came from, especially if they came from out of the state of Texas. And would you do that for us now?
Thank you. Well, I think we all enjoy talking about our past, and I am a native Kentuckian. Our family is about 8th or 9th generation Kentucky. My father was George Byron Bingham there, a newspaper publisher and editor, and I was in Mayfield, a town of about 8,000 at the time. I was born on the newspaper. My mother was Ellie Gregory Bingham, and there were 3 children, and we knew nothing but newspaper. We would go down at night, and that was when they had the old presses that were bedded in the floor. And many a night we've gone down and helped to fold papers by hand. They sat type by hand. It was a fascinating business. So you could say I was really on the ground floor. And as I told one boss when I went for an interview for a job, I have done everything in newspaper from sweeping out on, and it really was an interesting life in Kentucky.
All right, now I'd like for you to name your other 2, either brothers or sisters. You said there were 3 children. Please name those for our genealogical record, and also tell us in which town you were born, and if you'll tell us the year, that'll be fine.
Now, this was in Mayfield, Kentucky, and all my sisters and brothers were born there. My brother was George Daniel Bingham, known as Danny. He later became the political writer for the Nashville Banner. My sister was Virginia Bingham Garrett now. She also was a writer, and after my father's death, she became, and I was gone from there at that time I married, she became woman's editor of my father's old paper.
And name us the name of your father's old paper.
The Mayfield Messenger.
Mayfield Messenger, yeah. All right. And the Mayfield Messenger in Kentucky was important to you. What year did you leave Kentucky, Margaret Galloway?
When I married in 1940.
In 1940, something miraculous happened, and you married Randy Galloway Sr. And tell us where you met Randy Galloway Sr. and what brought about this wonderful union, and then talk about your family a little. Would you do that for me?
All right. Randy and I met when I was working in the mountains of Kentucky, and that's altogether a different story. After my father died, I was in college, and when he died, I lost a part of my life that I've never regained. He was my idol, my mentor. He had a 4th grade education and educated himself. He loved books. it was wonderful, and he became a publisher, then a writer, an after-dinner speaker, and then a syndicated writer for a New York syndicate. Then we went on. What did you want to hear now?
I want to know about how you met Randy
Oh,
Sr.
and so my husband, after my father's death, he knew people all over the state of Kentucky, of course, was well known. And I had to come out. My sister was about to graduate from high school, and I wanted to help her, and I wanted to help my mother. It was right after the Depression, and Daddy had a rough time with the paper. And so I came out of college for a while, and through one of his friends, I got a job as a social worker in the mountains of Kentucky. When you say mountains of Kentucky, especially at that time, that meant everything from getting in a car and driving up creek banks to these little cabins where people lived, and the children, some of them had never seen a car. This was in the late 30s. Anyway, I was in the mountains, and my husband was with the U.S. Corps of Engineers, and he's from Henderson, Kentucky. That is about 120 miles upstate from Mayfield. We're in West Kentucky. We met then they didn't have a hotel in the small town, and there was this huge boarding house, which was very nice, and they served 3 meals a day, and you really got good food. And so the first night I was there, I was introduced to Randy, and some woman that was there eating, she said, "Now don't expect to date him or anything, because if he has a date with you, he'll have one date and then that's it." Randy at that time I was 20, in my early 20s, and he was 32. Mm-hmm. So I decided he was a confirmed bachelor, but he was quite good looking with his engineer's outfit on and his boots and everything. So anyway, we did have a date, and then it just went from there, and that was in November of 39, and we married in July of 40. Mm-hmm. And I had always thought I would not marry. My goal was to work on the New York Times, but I didn't get there.
Marriage changed that, didn't it?
Yes, it did. But anyway, then Randy and I have 3 children. Randy, he is not Randy Jr., he's George Randolph. He has followed in the newspaper line, and he is a sports columnist for the Dallas Morning News. And as he says, "Mother, don't go bragging about all of us being in newspaper, because we all just got in a rut and couldn't get out."
All right, and Randy is your number 1 son.
Yes, he is.
All right, now
and
name the rest of the
Gregory is, he is darn his hide. He works in the Virgin Islands on St. Thomas, if you can believe it. I'm going to see him this summer. I'm very excited. Mm-hmm. He's in shipping over there and loves it. Our daughter, the youngest, is Ellen. They all graduated from Grand Prairie High School, by the way. And Ellen is now in California. She has worked in television with the Bob Newhart show behind the camera. She was an assistant to the producer for 5 years. And then she got a very good job with one of the big hotels in Beverly Hills, and she's public relations now. So we're all sort of, except Greg, we're kind of in the same mold.
All right, now, if either of these are married, we want Ellen's married name, and if she has children or if you have grandchildren, we must name those on this show right now.
That is the truth.
That is.
Ellen Beal, B-E-A-L, and she has no children, and they live in Manhattan Beach, California.
All right.
And Greg has just married at 42.
Good.
I believe, I think it's 42. And of course, there are no children. And then, but Randy has our pride and joys. 2 daughters. Gina is now, will be a senior at Texas A&M. She's our little Aggie next fall. And Jennifer will be a junior in Grand Prairie High School, and she's a varsity cheerleader and one of these that when she walks in the room, everything lights up.
Oh, wonderful.
And we're very proud of both of them. They're very smart in school and very kind, and of course I think beautiful girls.
And we're so pleased that Randy at least decided to stay in Grand Prairie, Texas.
Right.
All right. What brought you to Grand Prairie, Texas, Margaret Galloway?
Well, when you're in corn and tobacco country in Kentucky, you get to the point where, you can starve to death there, or you inherit a farm, or it's like in Texas, everybody, the wealthy people were in oil, and back there they were in tobacco. So Randy was working, my husband Randy, in an engineer's office in Paducah, which is about 25 miles away, which, by the way, was the home of Vice President Alvin Barkley, very loved man in Kentucky. Okay. We were in Mayfield till I think Randy was probably in the 2nd grade, and then the children on down. Greg was in kindergarten. And the engineering office where Randy was moving to New Jersey, and we could have gone to New Jersey, but being a Southerner, I could not see going there, and my husband couldn't either. So he began to send out resumes, and he did land a job with Forest and Cotton Engineers in Dallas. Mm-hmm. We came to Dallas, and we stayed there and for a couple of months, and looking all the time for a suburb and to move to. And so then I made this friend who told me that the publisher of the then Grand Prairie News-Texan was frantically looking for a woman's editor. His had gone out of town, so I said, no, I'm not interested right now. I'm trying to get settled in Kentucky. And she said, oh, please go talk to him. Well, I didn't at first, and so then I got a call from him. He said, just come out and talk to me. So I was telling Ruthie before the show, I didn't know where Grand Prairie was. I was just told which way to start, and I came down Chalk Hill, and that was before the interstate. And I stopped there, and I said, did you ever hear of Grand Prairie? And he said, yes, ma'am, it's right down the road, just keep going. So I drove into Grand Prairie. I did not know one soul. I had to look for the newspaper office, which was right on Main on the corner, and Miller Drugstore was across on the other corner at that time, and Mary and Roger Kiesler had a restaurant in there and all this. Yes. Do you remember? Went in and met the editor, the publisher.
And who was the publisher?
I wish you hadn't asked me that.
Not Mr. Brundage?
No. This was after his time.
After that time, okay.
I later worked for Charles Lewis. A lot of people will remember him.
You bet.
But this guy, I'm sorry, he was a very nice man. And he said, don't even talk to me. Just get over there and get in that pile of news that's stacked up on that desk and write for me. And I said, sir, I don't think I want to do this. I'm not settled in I've got to think about my family. Well, anyway, in about a month, I was in Grand Prairie. But we waited till midterm for the children to finish their schooling in Dallas, and then we came out here.
To Grand Prairie, Texas. Do you remember that magic year? I'd like to have that for the record.
57.
1957. And you were working at the then News-Texan. Mm-hmm. And what was Randy Sr. doing then?
But then he was at the engineering office in Dallas.
In Dallas, all right. And he commuted back and forth to Dallas.
And a lot of times they built dams and airports and things, and he was out of town a lot, too, on job. But I'll never forget, if you can imagine hitting a town cold and going into a newspaper office. Well, in a newspaper, especially a small town, you got to know people. You know, you have to get out and meet people. And I said, I told him, I said, do you realize I don't know a soul in this town? He said, that's all right, you'll learn them. And I said, can you give me one person's name here who's very active and or a club woman or something? And he said, I don't know. He said, try Ruby Miller at the drugstore. So I get on the phone and called her, and Miss Miller was very nice, and she said, I told her who it was, and she'd never heard of me, of course. And I said I would appreciate, I wanted you to know I was here, and I'm trying to get started. So that was my entry into, and then we joined the Presbyterian Church, and I just gradually got to know, and I would go to PTA.
Yes.
Started in PTA. Mm-hmm. And I was on the paper when Ruthie was president of council. I'm sure I was. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I remember very excitedly your Texas Life membership that you were given. And tell us the schools that your kids attended. Bowie?
Bowie, that's
Bowie,
right.
And Lee.
And then Lee, and then Grand Prairie High School.
Okay.
They all went through school here. They loved it. Randy wouldn't have thought of leaving.
All right. Now, when you were working for the News-Texan, and I believe Charles Lewis was one of your editors, did you have more than one editor that you worked with over a span of time?
Well, he was my boss.
He was your boss. Okay. And was Elmer Davidson involved in the paper at that time?
Yes.
As business manager?
No, I believe he was it sold advertising or something at that time.
At that time. What was it like coming to Grand Prairie, Texas, and you've met Ruby Miller now, and you've gotten into the PTA? Tell us some of the exciting things that you covered as a woman's editor, some of the things that happened to Grand Prairie during those years that maybe impressed Margaret Galloway. You must have been here about the time that the Grand Prairie Women's Club and some of the other things were taking place. I know that you've developed some wonderful friendships with people like Mildred Walker, some of the others that...
She's one of my idols, and Ruthie Jackson are two of my friends.
Let's talk a little bit about Grand Prairie of the past and some of the things that impressed you.
The Women's Club at that time, I think I went to the Dallas News about the time the Women's Club was... They were thinking about it, Alva Wagner and some of those women. I was asked to join the 20th Century
Study Club,
and that way I got to know more people. There were a lot of, isn't this terrible that I cannot, I saw, this was after the war, in the 50s, as you recall, Ruthie, everything had kind of calmed down. It was a decade of sort of quiet, peaceful living, if you remember.
Yes.
How it was, because everything was in turmoil during the 40s. It was a wonderful time, I thought, to rear children and everything. And I just enjoyed, I began to see Grand Prairie emerging, and especially Grand Prairie women, which was very exciting to me. And I thought Alva Wagner was one of the leaders. I remember Alva was working hard to get I believe the senior citizens started, or that building they had then. And there were a lot of
Miss Cliff Johnson, who...
That's right, but I didn't know her. Yeah, she was just beginning when I was... I went to the Dallas News in '61, I think. So.
And when you left the paper here and went to the Dallas News, what did you cover at the Dallas News? What did you do there?
Well, that was very exciting. Here I was, a country newspaper girl. I had worked on the Louisville Courier-Journal as an intern, and then I worked with their magazine section, but this was the big city newspaper where I one day was in Dallas, and I thought, I can do this. I could work over there. So I swallowed my pride and went up to this huge newsroom at the Dallas Morning News, and I remember walking into the newsroom, and the first thing I saw on the wall was a huge sign that said, "Write like you talk," which means write simply,
Yes.
but truthfully and with the facts. So that, I'll never forget that. And I didn't go through the personnel office. I walked, I asked to see the managing editor, and he said, I think they have somebody, I believe that they might be needing somebody in women's news. And I said, well, I've done women's news, and I'm on the Grand Prairie paper now. I had no idea I'd get the job. So he took me in and introduced me to Katie Dillard, who was then the woman's editor. And she said, "Have you had experience in a city?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And she said, I said, "But my experience mostly comes from doing a little bit of everything on a country newspaper." And I started writing for my father when I was 16. Well, I think that's what kind of got them. Mm-hmm. I had studied journalism at the University of Kentucky and at Murray State University. And, but I think my, just covering everything, and also in about 10 days they called and said, "Would you like to come to work?" So it was very interesting, and you go in the morning and you never knew what you were going to have to do, and some mornings there'd be a note on your desk, somebody was flying in that day, some celebrity, and you go out and meet the plane. And another thing that I really enjoyed over there was Julie Bonnell at that time had a talk show and also a cooking show. And Julie, they asked me, would I help Julie, would I do some writing for her food section? Julie was a television personality to the word go, but she didn't have much experience in writing, so I guess I was her ghostwriter.
You were her ghostwriter.
And so anyway, I did that, and then when Julie would have prominent guests on for her show, she'd always call over and she'd say, "Margaret, come on over. Carol Burnett's going to be here this morning," or, Bob Hope, everybody. And she's like you, Ruthie. She was amazing in that she would go in and she'd ask her secretary, she'd say, "Now who's coming today? And let me see." And maybe she'd get a book and bone up on them for 10 minutes, and she'd go on. Cold, absolutely. It amazed me. But I got to meet a lot of people. Carol Burnett was my favorite. She was like she is, as you see her today, very down to earth. She remembered my name, of course, which impressed me. And I think, and she was funny, and she was darling. But I did get to meet a lot of people, a lot of celebrities, and it was something else. And I was there during the Kennedy assassination, which I don't even like to talk about, but you cannot imagine a newsroom during those days.
That was tough, wasn't it?
We stayed over there for 3 straight days. They had a hotel across the park, and you could go there and sleep a while. And the phones were ringing off the wall. The news machines were just flying, and it was a very traumatic, and people were screaming at each other, and everybody was tired, and we were heart sick, and it was 3 days that I'll never forget.
All right, we have you to that point. What moved Margaret Galloway to Arlington, Texas? And during that time in Arlington, Texas, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left on this show. I want you to tell about a lady that has had an experience with a malignancy and yet comes out smiling and is still writing for the Dallas Morning News in your sense of the word. Look out and kind of wrap us up about Arlington, what took you there, and your dear love of still writing for the Dallas Morning News at times, and about your malignancy. Would you do that for us?
Well, thank you. I stayed at the Dallas News, I don't know how many years, and I enjoyed it. But it was a time of, I don't know, I wanted, my first love was a community small newspaper where I grew up. So I heard that there was a vacancy on the Arlington Citizen Journal for woman's editor, and I wanted to get back to a paper like that. It was a wonderful community paper at that time. So I just went out one day on a day off and talked to Mr. Hawks, and he said, I can't imagine why you'd be leaving the Dallas News to come to work on this paper. And I said, this is my first love, and that's what I like to do. I did accept the job, and we continued to live here. We were in Wildwood Oaks at the time, and we continued to live here because the children wouldn't think of going to Arlington to high school.
Right.
And they all wanted to graduate here, so that's what they did, and I commuted every day over there. And I've seen Arlington, of course, really grow, and Tom Vandergrift's great leadership. And then, since then, I have been publisher and editor of a magazine there called The Arlington Woman. Went through the traumatic time of my husband having emphysema and his death 5 years ago, I believe it was. And then after that, Tom Vandergrift called and asked would I help in a campaign, his first congressional campaign. I did.
2 minutes.
And then I worked for him after he was congressman in the office, which was very interesting, and learned a lot there. And then I had a couple of surgeries in between, nothing real frightening. And then one day, last year, I went to, I had my physical. I was going out to Ellen's in California for Thanksgiving. Thought, well, I'll get my physical over this time. So I went, and the doctor said, you're fine. All your tests came back great. Your breast exam, I didn't find a thing, but I want you to have a mammogram before you leave because that's just what I always order. So I did have a mammogram, left on the plane the next morning, forgot about the mammogram. When I got home, I hadn't been home an hour, I had not unpacked, and my family doctor called and said, get over to Dr. Ranks right away. And I knew Rank was the cancer surgeon. And he, 2 days later, I was in surgery. And they had found this that no doctor could find, and I'm just livid on this, that women have mammograms.
That is your crusade now.
Yes, it is.
Every woman do that.
And but the machine found it, and it had not spread, thank heavens, and I did not have to have chemo. But I do want to please beg women over 50 every year, and from 35 to 40 at least every 2 years.
Margaret Galloway is a freelance writer for the Dallas Morning News, a very special person.